Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Will McCoy. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Third Sector Intelligence, and I'm here with Chris Strauss Clark, our CEO today, talking about our platform, talking about what is 3SI, what do we do, what's an eSIDS, answering all these different questions for you. So, Chris, I appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So, you know what, let's just jump right in. I know there are lots of questions that people want answered and that are important to understanding what the work is that we do. So that being said, can you just start off with, what does third sector intelligence do, and what are the products that 3SI provides to states?
Sure. We are a software company that provide data and analytics primarily to the early childhood field. And our sort of flagship product or platform, as it were, is called CUSP, which is the Child Universal Success Platform. And it helps primarily state governments, but also other stakeholders reach children who really could use early childhood services and also to help them improve learning and life outcomes.
So you said that it helps reach children. How does it work? How does it do that?
Sure, we are a software company and we help primarily state governments with data and analytics, and we specialize in the early childhood field. So that means helping state governments to better reach and serve young children in school and in life.
Very good. So, are there different products? Is it a single product? Can you tell us about that a little bit?
So our flagship product is called the Child Universal Success Platform, or CUSP. What that helps state governments do is to better determine which children are eligible for the services that the state government or city government or other programs provide. And then once those children are served, to make sure that the services that are being delivered are of high quality and that ultimately translate to the outcomes that everybody wants and expects.
Okay. So it sounds like a very complex system. Where are you working? Where does the data come from? What are the different sources that you would expect to encounter when working with this type of system?
We start with census data, but we have to do a lot of things with census data to be able to make it a little bit more translatable and usable for the early childhood field. And then what we do is we match that and integrate it with state administrative data usually, but it can be other data sources. And basically what we're doing is we're trying to understand what's happening with every single child and then which services are being delivered to which children. Um, and then from there, what the quality is and how that is going so that the child receives the best possible service that they can and that the state is optimizing its funding as much as possible.
So is that what you just described, is that an early childhood integrated data system? Is that when people call that an eSIDS, is that what that is?
Yeah, it's our version of what that is, but as you
Okay.
know, Will, there are a lot of definitions for what eSIDS or eKids is. In fact, people can't even necessarily agree on how to pronounce the name.
Okay.
Um, but our version is that it's an analytical system that essentially ingests all of this data from all of these different sources and puts it together to be able to allow state governments, foundations, nonprofits, other major stakeholders to see the whole picture of the early childhood field, usually in a state, but it could be in a city, it could be in other geographies. That's traditionally what an eKids or an eSIDS is supposed to be. But there are other definitions. I'm not sure it's worth going into on this segment, but yeah,
Right.
that's what we do.
Okay, very good. And do you have this in place, in and operational in different areas?
We do, in fact. So we've been working on it for a long time. In fact, we've been in the field for over a decade. And what happened was is that we actually were called in a lot to help fix or to ameliorate or otherwise improve state systems that have, or other types of ESID systems that have already been built. There's a lot of issues with that, and we've finally decided we're sort of sick and tired of, cleaning up stuff that we didn't control. So we came up with what we thought was way better. And as a result of that, we actually have now what's called an ESIDS network, and it's in 5 states and represents over 20% of the U.S. population for children 0 to 5. The platform we're expanding it, so it's very, very exciting time, not just for us, but more importantly for our state partners and stakeholder partners, because it's really, really starting to take off in a way that is going to be useful and used, and ultimately helps children.
That's great. So, what is it that differentiates CUSP from other models that might be out there or that states may be currently utilizing?
That's a great question, and we could talk all day about that question. I'll try to keep it short, but there's a number of differentiating factors. One is that CUSP uses the latest in cloud technology, and that it is a software as a service. And to our knowledge, I think it's the only ESID that is a true software as a service, meaning that we maintain the software and we're continuously updating and improving it for our partners. Beyond that, it has a number of different features that we think are unique. One is that that we do, as we were talking about earlier, it really segments the entire population at the child level, so that every geography has literally a record of a child. Now, that child might be an estimated child. It might have some actual data on the child, or it could just be literally actual child level data. And we mix it all together. The key is, and this is really critical, is we want to make sure that those children who haven't had access and are the hardest to reach are still counted literally and figuratively in the system. What's traditionally been a really, really big challenge is that if you don't have data on the kid isn't counted, and then the kid isn't served. And that I just have fundamental issues, as do many in the early childhood field. So our approach is instead to make sure that we try to understand and reach every single kid that is out there. And if we don't have a lot of data on that kid, we will use census and do whatever we can to make sure that that kid is counted and that we're trying to reach that kid if that kid is eligible for services and isn't receiving any.
It was incredibly surprising to me to find out that states don't always have records who's in their population and who's being served and all of that. As an informed member of a community, that was just incredibly surprising to me that there's incomplete data out there. So what does 3SI do to kind of help make up those gaps in the data set?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we start with is just census. And again, as I talked about census, unfortunately there's not a sort of off-the-shelf census product that you can plug and play. So what we have to do is we have to take a whole bunch of different tables and put them all together with the help of census data experts and our state partners and others, so that we literally have canvassed an entire state, and we have, to the best of our ability and the best of our understanding, an estimate of where these kids are and certain characteristics about that child and children that matter in terms of early learning service: age, income, whether their parents work or not, and their address. Then after that, what we want to do is we want to set up a situation where we're always improving that data. So when we come in and we ingest state administrative data, that will be actual child level data for a certain part of the population. So what we do then is we overwrite our estimates with actual child level data, and we try to match it up as best we can. So if we had an estimate, say Zadie Jones in this particular address with this particular income, and then we find there's an actual child, Zadie Jones, and there's an estimate there, census estimate, we'll swap the two, right? And then Then what we do is we improve the data set over time, and that really, really helps to get an understanding of who we're serving and how they're doing.
Okay. So it sounds like you're talking a lot about sensitive data, data privacy, all of those different concerns that could come into play. Can you tell how do you make sure that all that information is secure?
What we do is we actually download our software into secure state government controlled cloud architecture. So we actually do not control the environment within which the data sits. That's the state government's job, and so they never ever lose control of what is very, very sensitive data, which you have to be very careful with. And so then they let us in. They have all the locks, they have all the keys, and we essentially work within that environment. And that's how we make sure that it is always 100% secure all of the time.
Okay. So, I'm sure there are states that are saying we could build this ourselves, right? And they go in and they there you've probably even heard some horror stories about states that have gone in and tried to build systems themselves. What's your response to that? What's your recommendation for that?
Well, I have a lot of sympathy for that type of exercise because we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of failed or mediocre projects that, frankly, a lot of really good people have put a lot of time and effort in, and just it hasn't been the objectives and the goals have not been realized. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. The first one is that oftentimes state governments are limited by their technology infrastructure and or their IT staff. And it's not that the IT staff are necessarily getting in the way, but that they have their own sort of practices and regulations and everything else. And so they may not be aware of cloud technology and what it can do, or they might be limited or prohibited from using cloud technology and data science tools. That's one. Second one is that state government and other types of governments don't really have the scale. As big as a state government can be, uh, it's just really, really hard to keep up with technology and to hire the right people to build and maintain and improve software. That's just really difficult endeavor. And so, even if you try to hire a vendor that does a custom job, you get a custom result, and it's just a once off, and it's just not. It can be really, really hard, and that then creates another problem, which is increased costs. So what happens is that when you try to do it yourself, then the costs usually exponentially increase because you don't have the scale and you're not leveraging work that has already been done, and you're not leveraging lessons learned and shared knowledge that goes with a software as a service that is used by multiple clients. We could go on about this, but
Right.
those are some of the primary reasons.
Well, I wanted to go in just a little bit about, 3SI has a different pricing model with the total cost of ownership in under consideration. So, can you talk about that just a little bit? What are the benefits, and why do you advise total cost of ownership over possibly another pricing model?
Yeah, that's great. So we have, like every software as a service, we do what's called a fixed fee, which that we it's very transparent, and we give the same pricing model to every state based on the size of the state. And that way, the state knows exactly what it's paying for, and it's a very predictable funding flow. That is designed to mitigate a whole bunch of issues that states have had and continue to have. One is that they don't really estimate, or they don't incorporate what we call the total cost of ownership, which is all of the costs associated with a project like this. There's sort of three components in particular that states miss or underprice. So the first one is that because it's a custom job oftentimes or almost always, they, again, as I said, don't have the economies of scale, and the vendor is sort of waiting on them for direction, and there's a lot of hidden costs that are only discovered after the fact, and that usually or almost always increases the price. And this is not new news. IT projects are notorious for going 2x or 3x over budget all of the time
Right.
because of this reason, right? So that's one. Another one is user adoption. People don't understand that. Look, costs. It's not enough to build it and just you know hope that they will come. You've got to really do a lot of work to to change and to sort of really drive user adoption in a way that the capability will be used and useful. And then a third one is continuous development and innovation. Like basically, a lot of state governments still think about it like a one and done model. Well, we'll build it and then we'll just maintain it for a fraction of the cost and it'll be good. That is not how technology works nowadays. If you have your iPhone, you know you're updating it constantly and it just sort of updates. All this technology has to update automatically, and that's what we do. If you don't have that similar model, it's almost going to be antiquated the moment that you build it if you don't have a continuous deployment model. So for all of these reasons, states just come in underpriced, and then it's just a really difficult road.
Okay. So for the cusp clients of third sector intelligence, the you created the ECIDS network. Can you tell us what that is and what the benefit is to the client?
The ECIDS network, what it is that it's what the name implies. It's a network in that all the states that are using CUSP benefit from being on the same platform. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is literally on the same platform. Everybody is, every state has control of their own data, as I described before. But what happens is because there are similar methodologies and similar code, it's similar sort of analytics. Because at the end of the day, states can be configured and they have their own sort of unique aspects, but on the other hand, there's a lot of overlap. So what you do is you get the benefit of having a state or many states already have done what you need to do. And as a result, you can go a lot faster. You have a lot more options. You don't have to sit there and recreate the wheel, literally. Um, and it just helps. Now, in addition to that, we also foster uh, informal sort of state to state lessons learned, and that's really powerful. So when, for example, one state had questions about data governance, we just introduced them to another state. We asked for permission to share the data governance documentation that a state that had already done this had off the shelf. We gave it to the state that was asking for it, and that's huge. And you can see that that has serious ramifications in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. And of course, the more the merrier. So that the bigger the network goes, then the more powerful the effect will be.
And about how big is the network right now? You mentioned 5 states. Do you have an estimate related to the number of kids that represents?
Right. So it represents about, as I mentioned before, 20% or so of the U.S. population, and that is comprises of California, Washington State, Georgia, Wyoming, and the state of Massachusetts. And that was very purposeful in that when we were rolling out the platform initially, we wanted to have a diversity of states in different areas of the country and with different sort of geographical and other types of characteristics to make sure that the platform worked well and was robust across, again, a wide range of situations. And I'm happy to say that it worked incredibly well, better than we could have hoped for, which is fantastic. So now we are in a situation where we are going to scale. And again, it's a very exciting time, and we're really enthusiastic about the type of help that this can provide to additional states and stakeholders in other areas of the country.
Very good. So you have a new product offering or a new public good that's coming out in 2024. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, it's called CUSP Public, and it is a small portion of the underlying CUSP enterprise model that we run for the ESIDS network. The origin story of CUSP Public was that the Gates Foundation and others were very impressed and wanted us to make at least some of our expertise more available to a wider audience. And so we suggested that possibly what we could do is we could do a carve out of our underlying model and make it available for free on our public website to encourage, stakeholders across the U.S. to be able to think about early childhood and using data analytics in the way that we do. And so I'm happy to report that we are almost done with what we call a beta. We will be putting it out there in Q1 of 2024, and you'll be able to hit our website and be able to see what that's all about, as well as to download some census data.
Very good. Can you talk about, I've had the opportunity to see CUSP Public in action and up and live, and it's really impressive. What struck me most was the scenario analysis. So how might a state be able to utilize the scenario analysis to their benefit for their state? Like, this is a great tool that you're putting out there. What can it do?
One of the challenges that many stakeholders, state government staff, and frankly, a whole slew of others struggle with is who is eligible for which services and what does that mean in terms of reach. And it makes it even more challenging in that there's a whole ton of eligibility requirements, and it really can be really, frankly, again, quite challenging to figure out what that number is and where these kids are and how that works. And then in addition, if you change the eligibility requirements, then you have to rerun your numbers. So giving an example, a major eligibility requirement is income. So in the US, if you are below a certain level of income, then you qualify for some sort of subsidy. And there are many kinds of subsidies. Examples are Head Start subsidies, there are state subsidies, there are national subsidies called the Child Care Development Fund, CCDF, and others. What happens is that depending on what your cutoff is for your state, let's say it's 175% of the federal poverty line, then you have to then calculate, well, how many children are estimated to be under this and then qualify. But let's say then, whoops, the eligibility changes to 150%. Or let's say you have to toggle back between 175% and a state median income estimate, or SMI, which is another type of estimate, and sometimes you have to use both. It starts to get really complicated really fast about how you figure out how to understand which children are eligible for which services where when you're juggling all these competing sort of requirements. And so our tool, CUSP Public, helps perform scenario analysis to make that process a little bit easier.
Very good. So let's take a step back. 3SI has been around for more than 10 years, more than a decade. And through that time, there have to be some great success stories. And so if you could just, what are some of the benefits that states have seen? What are some things that you need to give some kudos about?
Well, one of the ones that I really like the most is, of course, in our own backyard because I'm in Seattle and that's where 3SI was founded. And we still obviously have a very strong presence in Seattle, although now we have employees in other states as well, as you know. I'd say, oh, it's probably now at least 5 years ago that we were approached to apply an earlier version of CUSP to do exactly what we're talking about, which is to understand who is being reached or not reached in the Seattle Tacoma area and where there are what we call access deserts, meaning areas in Seattle Tacoma that don't have adequate childcare services and therefore children who are eligible for services and should be receiving them cannot because there are not enough literally services and supply in their neighborhoods. And so what we did is we ran the model and we produced a report for a large stakeholder group that ultimately was then presented to the King County Council. The results were that the King County Council then approved over $150 million vis-a-vis a bond levy to build more early learning services and supply to and really literally place them in these access deserts. And so that is ongoing, and that will continue to occur in I think through 2035 or 36, if my memory serves. So that is a very, very concrete example of how this works. Now there are lots of others examples. One more example is that we do a lot of work in terms of determining the quality of services and or making sure that we ingest data about everything from teachers to assessments to quality ratings, et cetera, et cetera. And so then that helps, again, state governments, really improve their services and make sure that what they're getting bang for their buck, literally. So another great example, again at Washington State, is that we helped to do a lot of modeling, which resulted in Early Achievers, which is a quality rating improvement system, and we helped to convince the state that it needed to scale Early Achievers statewide. And that was a huge win because I think it really resulted in improved quality across the state in a way that didn't exist previously.
That's great. Um, so we've identified the need, we've identified the solution. We've even said, here's a free tool with Cusp Public. So if a state comes to 3SI and says, you know what, we want to find out more, we need more than what Cusp Public has to offer, but we don't know what the next steps are. What would you advise?
We would advise first is to enter into a discussion whereby a state or a coalition of partners that is helping the state or the government or whoever is entertaining the notion of signing up for CUSP Enterprise, what they're really getting into in terms of the preparation and the readiness needed to actually deploy CUSP. Now, the good news is that it's relatively easy, in particular in comparison to what I was describing about these custom jobs that didn't go very well, right? It usually takes less than a year, and frankly, the technology you can set up in a week. It's crazy how amazing that is nowadays. But there are a lot of things that need to happen. And we can go as fast as possible, but usually, it takes a village. And so you have to, for an effort like this, really make sure that you are doing all the right things in terms of best practices. Because the one thing that we won't do, Will, is we will not compromise in terms of best practices because we firmly believe that that's what is necessary to be successful. So some of the bigger elements of readiness are obviously you need to have the technology platform. It has to be on the cloud, and there are specific requirements that we help a potential partner think about. Again, the technology is pretty easy to set up. It's usually, the people and the political and the process factor, which is state or partner specific, that is a little bit harder. Another one is sometimes a data inventory needs to be done. Sometimes we need to think about and help a state with capacity analysis, even though CUSP doesn't, we do it all for you. You still need to be able to use it. So there sometimes, we need to talk about who the users are and how that's going to work. And so there are a number of different elements to that, but ultimately, again, we can go very, very fast, but we also recognize that, that partners have their own speed and rhythm. And so we do what we can to accelerate it as much as possible, but within the sort of limitations and sort of parameters of whoever we're talking to. So that is a sort of a intermediate service that helps, or set of services that helps bridge CUSP public to CUSP enterprise. And we've done that with all of our network partners, and we just sort of offer it as a set of services no matter what, just to help advance the field.
So tell me a little bit about the team at 3SI. I mean, it's quite a collection of pretty amazing people. And so if you could just talk about the variety of positions, the types of roles and experience levels, or, there's some pretty special folks. You want to talk about them?
Yeah, there is. And I feel very, very blessed and grateful that we have been able to assemble such a talented team. Maybe I should back up and start with one of the big differentiators, which we haven't really talked about, which is that one thing that I think our clients really appreciate about 3SI is that we are early childhood specialists and experts in data. And a fervent belief that I think we all have here at 3SI is that it's very difficult to build a software platform like CUSP and to do the integration if you actually don't understand the field and you don't know what the data is telling you and what should be done with it. And so we, I think, are one of the only what I would call vertically integrated organizations where we have a soup to nuts set of supports so that the state or partner can really it's not off the shelf, but it's as close as it's going to get to sort of an off the shelf purchase, right? And so what that comprises of are, we have, as you would expect with a software firm, we have an engineering team, software engineering team. And then we have a product team, which is comprised of actual software product folks who figure out what the product roadmap should be and then direct the engineers to continue to develop and maintain CUSP and elements of CUSP. But then we also have what we call a customer success or client success team, and they are PhDs or other types of degrees that really have knowledge of early childhood and then can help the partner really translate the platform and the data into something that can be really used and useful and really drive user adoption. And so, we have all of that in addition to, of course, strategic partnerships, which is to make sure that we are taking account of all of the different elements of the market and of demand more broadly. And then finally, of course, last but not least, our finance and administration, which is very critical, especially when you're dealing with state government partners, data, sensitive data that, we are doing what we need to be doing to comply. So all of that is absolutely critical. But again, what's really, really important is that we can meet our partners sort of as equals in the early childhood space, and that we're not just being told what to do, but in fact we can usually oftentimes help guide our partners in a way that makes for just a much more efficient and effective sort of marriage when it comes to this work.
Right. So if a state is interested in pursuing something like this, where does the funding typically come from to put a a system like this in place?
It can come from federal sources. Preschool development grants is one such source, and that what oftentimes what happens is that states use that at least to start a project like CUSP, or to help with some of the readiness and some of the other elements that we talked about. It can come from there's what's called CCDF discretionary funds, where that's another federal funding stream that then states use for projects like this. It can come from, at least initially, from foundations who are interested in helping particular geographies or states or communities, up their game. And so that's a sort of catalytic form of funding that's been really successful. And then state government funds themselves. So what will happen is state governments will use their own funds and maybe even go to their state legislature to ensconce this into a regular state funding stream. Could be a mix. So it really, really depends. And there's been a lot of different structures, and we try to just be as flexible as possible to work with and meet each partner wherever they are.
Now, foundations have leaned in with some of this work, right? And helping fund some of the different pieces. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, they have, and they usually like to engage and fund earlier, and that I think is appropriate, because if once we're up and running, you really do want to have this be more coming from state or federal government sources on a more ongoing basis. But sometimes it's very hard to apply and find the money for more flexible uses to, in particular at the beginning when you're sort of determining readiness and you're sort of trying to figure things out and you want to move faster. And foundations really actually like that type of role, because it helps them be catalytic and get the state over the hump, so to speak, but then it allows them to exit in a way that won't leave them with a bill over the long term. That's usually what's happened, and it's been very successful in multiple areas. Yeah.
So, a couple of different terms that get thrown around when talking about ESIDS and all of that, that it's critical when you get down to the definition level. Can you talk about P20 versus cradle to career, and why it's important to be familiar with both terms?
Right. So P20 is there's even another term, as you know, called the State Longitudinal Data System, or more, the acronym is SLEDS. And what that comprises of is a system that is similar to an ESIDS, and what we do. It sort of pulls together a whole bunch of data from various systems, but it actually is more extensive in that it's pulling data from an entire K-12 system, and then also from post-secondary systems. So a P20 means preschool to sometime after high school graduation. I don't know, really 20 is, this always seemed a little bit arbitrary to me, but whatever. And the W is usually for workforce. So, the 20, I think, is, if you're doing a community college and you do it for 2 years and then you enter the workforce. But then there's these questions about, okay, what happens if you have an undergraduate degree? That's 4-year and all this other stuff. So that's P20. Cradle to career is similar, but there is a really material difference in that it starts at birth versus preschool. And that for us is a material difference, because we obviously operate, and CUSP operates primarily in the 0 to 5 space. So from the time that the child is born to the time that the child enrolls in kindergarten, or maybe shortly thereafter, if we're thinking about incorporating kindergarten readiness assessments. It's one of these things where a SLEDS or a P20 or cradle to career, call it what you will, it can incorporate what we do, but at the same time, Our experience is that it usually does not because it's focused more on K-12. So that's a very abbreviated primer of a very complex topic, but you know, hopefully that that's at least a start.
Right. So, what drove you to found 3SI? Like, I know you talked about we ran into some we were fixing other people's problems and all of that, but at some point you transitioned from what you were doing previously and said, "Wait a minute, there's something here that I want to run after." Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
So I worked at the Gates Foundation for a long time, 5 or 6 years, and it was a really, really fantastic time, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. But at the end of the 5 or 6 years, I found myself wanting to be a little bit closer to on the ground type programs and impact, in particular closer to home. At the foundation, I was did a lot of international work, and so I just wanted something a little bit literally closer to home. So I left the Gates Foundation and I started a consulting practice within a small firm. And unfortunately, that was in 2008, right after the recession hit. And so I found myself in an office with not a lot of business, wondering what the heck I had just done, leaving the most stable organization on the planet and going rogue. Yeah, so that was interesting. But then what happened was is that my goal I decided to stick with it. And my goal at the time was just look, I really wanted to help those who needed it with data and analytics, but be closer to home. And early childhood was definitely an area of focus for me. But when you're a small entrepreneur, you can't necessarily dictate exactly what kind of business you're going to get. So I had hopes that I could grow early childhood, but I had a number of different sort of uh, things, going at the time. And so then fast forward, what happened was is that early childhood obviously was huge demand, and I saw a need for data analytics and to really help the field with data analytics. And so over the course of the next decade plus, we really just developed our subject matter expertise and kept developing models and kept working with all just a tremendous amount of stakeholders, both locally, regionally, and nationally. And that ultimately then what emerged was Cusp. And so at some point I converted the consulting firm to a software firm to better be able to deliver what I felt like was and what I feel like is just a fantastic and very exciting set of products and services to the field in a more scalable and sustainable way. So again, incredibly exciting. Frankly, I don't think I've been more excited than I am right now in my career for what's to come. But yeah, that's the story.
I appreciate that. I think that's about all the time that we've got for today. So I do want to thank you for your time today, Chris, for talking through CUSP, ECIDS, all of the different pieces, and look forward to our next conversation. So thank you.
Thanks, Will.
All right.
Appreciate it.